Terribly sorry. So I hereby call to order the 8 August Des Moines City Council Environment Committee meeting. The first order of business is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes from the meeting of July 11th.
Second.
The minutes then are approved. The mics are really kicking it today. That takes us to our next order of business, which is a presentation on, I believe, version 5 of the Des Moines Creek Basin Plan.
Great, thank you, Chair. Tyler Beakley, Surface Water and Environmental Engineering Manager. As you stated, we're going to be covering the next iteration of an ILA for the Des Moines Creek Basin. This is between the Port of Seattle, City of SeaTac, and City of Des Moines. So by intro, I'll jump into a little background. This all started in 1996 with ILA 1. That was the initial planning phase of these entities coming together, which originally included WashDOT and King County as well as funding partners, to do some enhancements to the creek. To one sort of main issue is let's solve Des Moines Creek and the flooding issues we're seeing down at the beach park. And corridor wide, we're getting high flows from the airport. So part of what the plan was to do at the time was to build a regional detention facility, a bypass pipeline when the creek does get high flows, and then do habitat restoration projects out the creek to support habitat and rearing for salmon that come up seasonally, as well as set up an operation as a maintenance plan for when these improvements were built, that we'd be able to maintain them and operate them through time. So that was the origination back in 96. 97 and 98, those were ILAs 2 and 3. Those continued the design process as a group as funding changed through time and the project evolved. And finally in 2004, we got into construction, which was ILA 4 and our current ILA. So this current ILA that we're under funded construction of the regional detention facility, the bypass pipeline, and the habitat restoration projects, as well as sort of how we're operating now is just in a O&M fashion. Let's see here, checking my notes, making sure I cover everything I want to. So that's how it's been, at least the time I've had on the committee, is over the last few years, is each committee member is paying in to an annual O&M fund so we can support our annual efforts. That funding is broken up on a percentage basis for how much each entity, how much impervious surface is within each jurisdiction's area within the basin. So Des Moines, under ILA 4, is at 18%. I believe SeaTac and the Port are in that 40-ish range percentile each. So now that brings us to ILA 5. We're at the end of the 20-year ILA of ILA 4, which expires in December, end of the year, and is the reason we have been discussing a new ILA as a group, and also considering what can we expand on. Are there any new projects we can consider? So ILA 5, we've been working on it for about a year as a group. It's also gone through legal review with the Ports team, SeaTac's team, and Des Moines' team. It is another 20-year agreement. We've added projects for invasive monitoring. These are your invasive species, such as Himalayan blackberry or English ivy, and the list goes on within the stream corridor, where we can have stewardship projects or map the extents of it and then go and actually do the projects to remove it. We're also looking at expanding what we do as education and outreach. So how do we tell the public what we're doing as a basin committee? What can we promote for water quality? What sort of, if you've ever been to the trailhead on 200th, they have a kiosk which talks about the creek and stream health and is educational. So we're looking at potentially How can we add maybe another kiosk on the Des Moines side? What information could we share? And then as well as sort of hosting events or sponsoring stewardship activities throughout the creek for cleanups, et cetera. And then lastly is a needs assessment. So this is where we're actually monitoring water quality, different various pollutants that we could measure and track in the creek and see, you know, essentially at a high level, you're looking at the health of the creek and seeing, okay, here's what the basin needs now. And that's really a new study that we would put, and then from that develop a list of projects that the committee could take on. So the way the agreement is broken up, Des Moines in its role, we would manage contracts that come in basin-wide that relate to stream and habitat health. All that's saying is it's funded through the Basin Committee, but Des Moines is hosting that contract. And we kind of split up the role. So CTAC would take any contracts that went basin corridor wide for the bypass pipeline, and then the port would take on any contracts related to the regional detention facilities. Now, if a contract came in with any jurisdiction that was solely within that entity's boundary, then they would own that contract. For example, since Des Moines is responsible for habitat replacement, but there was a specific need within CTAC for habitat replacement contract, it wouldn't make sense for us to take a contract to Des Moines Council to do work in CTAC. So if it's not basin-wide, CTAC would then own that contract, even though it's coming from the Basin Committee funds. Cost share, this is a moving target currently. We're having active conversations as a committee as we're still dialing in this number. So what we're looking at is new King County LiDAR maps that are looking at impervious area. And also the Port of Seattle, they have a shared treatment system where they have a large chunk of the airport property that their stormwater is actually treated through sewer. So that area is likely going to come out of their basin percentage. And the new percentage for Des Moines is actually decreasing to about 16.6%. And that is likely the new number you'll see in the final ILA when it comes to the full council for approval. Currently, we're paying about $60K annually to fund O&M, and that's Des Moines' portion at the 18% level. We did a life cycle cost analysis to look at these assets through time for the next 20 years and making sure our current funding matches through time need. And basically preliminary results from that is we're looking great, and these numbers might come down. One, our percentage is coming down, but also the demand for O&M is coming down, and our reserves as a committee are looking pretty healthy. So it may be more about $50K a year annually for Des Moines. This does come out of the surface water utility, by the way. I do want to make sure I mention that. And then last note on my end before I open it up to questions is just that we are going to have a final draft that will include pictures. It'll include cost estimates. Anywhere where there's current gaps, those are areas that we were still doing final touches on in this agreement to get it final. So I believe that's all I have prepared. So yeah, if there's any questions, happy to answer them.
Colleagues, fire away.
Yes, thank you. So can you explain why WashDOT is now, they're a funding partner, but they're no longer a committee participant, considering the amount of pavement they're going to lay down?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can look at all these pieces of built infrastructure as assets to the jurisdictions. WashDOT isn't a owner jurisdiction by land. They're a contributor to the basin, but they don't own these specific assets. So the way the agreement is between the landowners, the remaining 3 landowners, of the assets, and there's a shared easement that goes between all of them, between the 3, I'll call them owners of these assets, to do shared funding. So WashDOT contributed originally as a partner and through the 509 corridor project when they were building, and I don't know the complete history of it, but there was a nexus between these projects and their project, and they joined the ILA to contribute, to help build these. And that's the same with King County as well.
So, okay, let me see if I got this right. WashDOT does not control their right-of-way?
They control their right of way, but these assets are not in their right of way.
And
But-
it's shared right away. The easement and the,
Between these jurisdictions.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
no, I'll defer to the chairman.
Well, yeah, no, I've been waiting for, and by the way, I mean, this really is a huge deal, and so I hope you'll, if there are multiple rounds of questions. Councilmember Oxiger brings up, I'm just going to start rhetorically, that everything having to do with the airport and all of this stuff, the notion, you end up with this whole funding model is just manifestly unfair to me in that basically, it's based on land at the time as opposed to ongoing impacts. And so I'm just shouting into the void on that one. It just strikes me as odd that the Lake to Sound Trail and all of this stuff, that they wouldn't continue to have skin in the game. But anyway, can we get a status report at some point on how well previous goals have been met? I mean, I see wonderful work, in building the trail and everything, but I honestly, in terms of critters, salmon,
Yeah.
the health of the forest, yeah, you know where I'm. It's really good that you put 6 PPD in there, but can we get a list of the things that will be monitored? I'm a little nervous that the port's interest is to, frankly, is to monitor criteria, pollutants and everything, but you don't know what you don't know. Like, I don't know, PFAS. And in other words, part of the big conflict with this ended up with them developing their stormwater, their water. They didn't have a water treatment plan previously. And some of their argument is that we're already best in class. We've already done the work. And I'm like, yeah, but, so that's, I would like to know what we're monitoring and if there's room to think about adding elements. So if we're doing monitoring stuff, are we also, the narrative mentions a lot about, like, the flora and everything, but are we also monitoring like other types of critters, birds, and that kind of thing? Or,
Yeah, I guess let me speak to the last 3 points there. So for the status report, I just want a clarification. Would you like that before the final ILA comes to council, before the end of the year? Or could we put that on next year's Environment Committee agenda?
well, it's hard to vote for something that, you vote for something and then it's essentially cased in amber. And is there room for change next year? If there's not, then I'd like to, but I'm also cognizant of your staff time. And I'll just, if you'll indulge me, like when you said 60K, and I was going, wow, that sounds really low, because this sounds like a lot of work. And so I want to save the taxpayers money, but I'm wondering how much value you can actually get for, that's, am I wrong in that? It doesn't sound like a lot of money, given the ambitious.
Right, no, it's actually, part of looking in the past on how they structured it and the success of
Yeah.
how they planned this. So there's reserves of about 600K in the O&M fund.
Okay.
And we're gonna, over the 20 years, draw that down
Yeah.
with continuing to add around 60K.
Okay.
Um,
I'm not trying to, I don't know what is reasonable to ask for, given this funding.
Yeah.
But it would be ideal to have a sense of like where we're at, so that we could say, wait a second, this is plenty of money, or, maybe not, or maybe we need to, double down on volunteer types, I don't know, yeah.
And so just broadly, I can answer, what are the successes and how are we meeting those original goals? At a very high level, it's the construction of these facilities, and they're mostly related to flood control.
Yeah.
Environmental impacts, it's adding those woody debris, the habitat zones within the creek. There's been some minor invasive removal. But as far as metrics for water quality, that is what we don't have currently. And also has not necessarily been the focus to date.
Okay, I mean, my desire, I don't know, the committee, but, the council, but my desire would be to have a list of the proposed items to be monitored. Is it 6 criteria, or is it 307 like a water district, what I
So,
mean?
to answer that, this ILA that we're approving sets the framework for the committee to monitor. It's not saying which pollutants will be monitored. That will be voted on as a committee in the new ILA, and it requires a consensus.
Okay,
So the Port and CTAC couldn't team up and say, we want to monitor this without our vote. So what we can do is, as we propose the project for monitoring, which is the needs assessment, I can come back to the committee with our recommendation
that's an excellent.
at that point.
I have one other thing. In the original ILA, they mentioned septic as being, and fecal coliform stuff, like left, right, up, and down. That seemed to be a main concern. It's not mentioned at all in ILA 5. So, problem solved, or is it?
Not problem solved, likely problem dropped as
Oh,
far as
darn.
focus.
Can we
Now,
drop it?
we can undrop it, yes, but as far as what came before me and the history of the committee and
Yeah.
why that didn't continue on, I can't speak for it, but
Okay,
absolutely, given what we know about Poverty Bay and what we know about
I'm just
the health of
North
the
Hill,
sound.
man, I'm just,
Exactly, septic all around, so that can be, for sure, be added to the radar.
okay, then believe it or not, that's, I mean, yeah, I think, yeah, is there any, the website thing, I mean, is there any kind of public input into developing this plan, or, because they'll come up with better ideas than I can think of, and, not me personally, but, yeah. Is there any input in this, or is it strictly up to the committee members? I'm assuming it's a closed process.
I think that's the vision of it. Again, this sets the framework to create a website.
Yeah.
But I think that was the vision, it's let's create a platform to share to the public,
Yeah.
to start that outreach, not necessarily help them build the website, but
No,
have it
no,
forward-facing
no.
to send information out.
No, this is the province of subject matter experts. This is not, I'm just, I pretend to know what I'm talking about, and, but I just want there to be some, I just want the public to be able to have some meaningful input into just the various pollutants and stuff we're getting. It's the airport gravity and the ask.
And I kind of think that is the framework, because the general public, this basin committee has been just hard infrastructure and not interfaced with the public at all. It is kind of closed door and really focused on
Yeah.
pipe condition scores and bypass pipelines and ponds. So that's the vision of the committee now is let's take a look at what we can do with education outreach.
Okay.
Now, that's not necessarily defined, and it can be defined over time, and again, brought annually to the committee to do check-ins.
All right, and at the risk of being, I'm told I saturate people, but, so there are joggers along the Des Moines Creek Trail who, when there are problems with the de-icer, they can tell you which brand of de-icer it is, because one is sort of greenish and one is sort of brownish. And so those are the public people that I want to be able to, I'm sure they're doing a fabulous job now, but yeah, okay, I think that's it. Colleagues, please, fire away.
I was hoping just for a clarification, just for my own understanding, to make sure that I know part of the discussion that you're having. So it sounds like to me that the ILA continues the work, but the work group is really the committee, the Basin Committee. And the Basin Committee then will set its own work priorities within the framework of the ILA, but it's not set in stone in the ILA.
Correct.
Okay.
It
so-
creates a framework.
Right, exactly. So there are things that are written here, but it doesn't need to be so prescriptive that you say the committee will work on year one this and year two this, because it's a 20-year agreement. And things may change, emphasis may change, an emerging issue may come up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can kind of see it as this defines the maximum extents, and then we have to work within that.
Right.
We're not going to go beyond the scope, but we can work within the scope. So one example is the website. It says the committee may
Sure.
do a website. But yeah, we're not committing to a website and anything beyond a website. It's as through time, as initiatives and all that are discussed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And then and so I think, I want to make sure I know what Councilmember Harris is asking, that there are previous priorities or work projects that were conducted by the committee that aren't necessarily reported in here, because this is not a report.
Correct.
So that-
There was prior initiatives that aren't reflected in here from past committee members and past ILAs
Right.
that are likely out there.
Right, okay. So we could get reports about committee activities or projects or outreach any time we decide to work it into the agenda, or you have something that you would like to report to us.
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I'm following all of that. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Anything else? Okay.
Last,
Yeah.
maybe point of clarification, I want to make sure I'm clear on this, but the desire is for me to come back to Environment Committee if the timing works before I have that final, maybe a final draft of the ILA. I'll get once more for a second before full council.
I'll just ask the committee, I would simply like to have a sense of the items to be monitored. If there is, any broad consensus, meaning, just, yeah, just what set of pollutants and specifically, stuff like E. coli, FCBs and PFAS, metals, I don't want to get too expansive. I just, the edge case, the bad edge case would be, we're only looking at these criteria pollutants and we're not looking at anything else. That's all. I just as a starting point.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be as Councilmember Grace Matsui said, this is just a starting point, but I'd like to know where we're starting from.
Right.
If that's okay.
So maybe the comment is just some more clarity on the work description for monitoring, and maybe a better menu of pollutants that could be monitored.
Possible, yeah, because again, every test costs a fortune, and, or some of them do,
And that,
and I don't know how much money you've got to work with.
Yep. Well, the more we can define it, the more that it creates that framework for a menu approach for, as the committee develops this basin needs assessment, then we can work back to this description. And if fecal's not on here, we can add fecal, we can expand it. So we define our bound of our scope better.
Grace Matsui, please.
Well, I'm just checking to make sure that those are things that are actually salient issues that we would be testing for. If there's not a reason testing for it, there's no reason to list it as an example. So any type of monitoring is kind of not helpful, but things that would be higher priority would be. And I think in terms of bringing this to full council, I would love to see not only the highlights of the upcoming ILA, but what, like, 4 bullet points about what the previous LIA accomplished. Like, what are some highlights that you accomplished in the last 20 years? So that we can sort of see this is a continuation of work. And an ILA, again, is not a report, it's an agreement. And so if we can work in a report, and maybe you already have this on the schedule, I can't remember what we did in January. That is something that we could continue to place on the agenda, and then it can be reported out to the full committee.
Yep, and I guess going back to the monitoring, this is broad enough as is, if approved today, that we could monitor any pollutant of concern as a committee. But I think where we hit that is coming back to Environment Committee, there's 2 committees here, coming back to Environment Committee to share what the proposed plan is. Anytime we have a new task scheduled, to do a check-in, to make sure it's aligned with council's goals. And with the other point of previous ILAs and highlights, I'm thinking in the form of the council packet, when you have the background section, I can add that when we come to full council, and make a section about highlights.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It's always nice to have something that's like, this is why you should care.
Yes.
This is what we accomplished. This is what will fund or direct attention at these types of activities, so that it's a little less abstract, more concrete for the listeners, the public.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just like the original, the original ILA, the one that they had this map that was fairly striking as to all the green stuff that is now not green. And, you know, since then, the Des Moines Creek Trail itself has been built. The original thing talked about septic quite a bit, as I said, and so they're just very different documents, and the terrain of the entire area it's really, yeah, just having that 1997 graphic with like the 2012, which is even before the business park, it's like, whoa, I mean,
Right.
so just that, if you could add that, that would be pretty, just that one image would be, I think would be fairly instructive for the public as to, and other than that, I think that's enough from me. Is that it?
That's it.
Sorry. That seems to be the last item of business. As always, I invite anyone from the public who wants to provide a comment before we adjourn. Any takers? Please approach the podium and give your name and the city where you live, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara McMichael, City of Des Moines. I have a couple of questions regarding this report and comments. I appreciate the request for the status report on health of the forest and the list of things that will be monitored from Councilmember Harris. I did write down before you mentioned that. I'm wondering about all the warehouses built along 24th Avenue South since 2004 and how that makes, is that port related? Is that considered port related land? Because it seems like that would take us, it wouldn't take us down to 16% if it were city-related land, from 18% to 16%. It seems to me that, we'd have a whole lot more impermeable surface. And so that's the question. Are there any interests of Des Moines that SeaTac and the port, that the city of SeaTac and the port would be uninterested in supporting in this ILA. I just have to stress that public input and understanding has changed in the last 20 years. I think 20 years ago we didn't know that or understand, or maybe weren't defined as an overburdened community when it comes to environmental impacts. That's why I think this committee is so important and has really important work to do. So I have talked to so many just Joe citizens out there who really want to understand better what's going on and don't want it to be behind closed doors and want to be able to provide input. And finally, on a more positive note, I'm wondering about the possibility of using citizen science for some of those findings. We were doing a hike the other day with some people who are really interested in wildlife, and, you know, could we bring in a big bird watching survey, you know, for the Des Moines Creek Basin and really focus on that, or insects or amphibians. So those are some of my thoughts, but we really keep the public informed. Get that website up as soon as possible. These are things we really care about. Thank you.
I'll press the button. If nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We are out of here. Thank you very much to everyone.